Well, it's been nearly 4 weeks since the Liberal government unveiled their federal budget, and they're still selling one of the key planks. Changes to the capital gains tax inclusion rate was supposed to be an easy win because it affects less than 1% of the population. But this morning on the Prime Minister's X page, his team released this video.
So the very richest people are going to profit a little less off their assets. Only 0.13% of Canadians, to be exact. These are people who have an average income of $1.4 million a year and are mostly in their 60s or older.
All right, that's what we call an explainer in TV land. So is it because of some of the pushback the government has seen from businesses and doctors' associations? And what's behind this social media strategy? Let's bring back the front bench. Scott Reid, Shakir Chambers, Kathleen Monk, and Marika Walsh. Kathleen, I'll start with you on this one. What do you think is behind the strategy?
I think that the Liberals are trying to get up off the mat. Like, I think they get points for producing the video. I think they lose points for doing it in a posh locale. Like, I think that, I think for sure that Pierre Poilievre certainly understands this medium better, and he gets what kind of ambiance you need to convey. Maybe the
You didn't like the
beige,
you didn't like the couch?
No, the
no,
couch.
okay.
The beige fort was not exactly the right thing. But listen, they're trying, and they're actually getting some traction. Like, some credit to the Liberals. They launched this, I think, at around 10 a.m. this morning. Yeah. They already had around 1.4, 1.5 million views. When you compare that on Twitter to, you know, the famous Pierre Poilievre housing video that he launched in December, it only has 4.5 million views. So they've caught up, you know, pretty well, a quarter of the catch up in about a day. But I think it's really what's more important is they're trying to drive the message, right? That the nurses who make $70,000 shouldn't be paying a tax rate that is a certain level, while investment bankers who are making $800K a year are getting away not paying their fair share of taxes. And I think some of that message comes through. It's a bit complicated. Capital gains is a complicated issue. But
what are you talking about? It's so easy.
When you say things like, you know, this is only going to affect, you know, a small portion of Canadians, and these are the kind of Canadians that are already making $1.4 million a year, then maybe Canadians will start to understand that this is a good thing, and that money from taxing people a little bit more fairly can go towards paying some of the programs and things that we Canadians want, like dental care or pharmacare.
Are you trying to say that the inclusion rate is not easy to understand?
I'm saying that.
I mean, like, I learned that in elementary school. I'm kidding. Marika, this latest one on the capital gains, it did get a lot of pushback from associations, from some people as well. Do you think that this video is in response to that pushback?
No, I think it's a continuation of their strategy on capital gains. They're still trying to get a fight on it with somebody other than doctors. So I think the fact that they've hived off the bill to be separate from their omnibus budget bill to force a vote specifically on that is also part of the strategy. More broadly, on the video rollout, what I've been told is that because they're not doing advertisements, because of government rules around advertising and the Liberals' lack of funds, I guess, or lack of belief in them, they're trying to leverage the reach of his social media platforms through these videos. So they're trying to connect differently with people to break through in the way that, as Kathleen said, Pierre Poilievre is. So whether that works, I mean, I'm not sure Twitter is for the masses, but he does have a lot of followers on Twitter. He has a lot of followers on Instagram. So if these videos get the attention of people, then that would help at least try and get their message out. Whether that changes anything, I think it's still to be seen, because they've now had this budget rollout for a very long time.
Yeah, and Scott, the way they're doing it as well, really trying to make sure they're slickly produced, the editing and that sort of thing, seemingly going for that younger demographic that they had, if you believe the polls, that they're losing to.
I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure they're really going for the younger demographic. When I look at this, you know, you guys talked about the soft, creamy beiges. It's very Nancy Myers look in my mind. I'm not sure they're gunning for the 26-year-old, so we'll see. But I do think this is offense, not defense, you know, because when you think of the doctors and so forth, you'd say, well, maybe they feel forced to get out there and defend. They're not trying to defend it. They are desperate to get somebody into the boxing ring with them other than a profession, and they're trying to perpetuate it. It's why we're going to see this introduced as its own standalone piece of legislation. So I think that's what's going on around this issue. The single last thing I would say is I do think they're upping their game in terms of the quality of these videos. If you looked at some of the, even just 5 weeks ago, some of the pre-budget stuff you had some of the ministers doing, oh, hi, I was just sitting at my desk doing some work. It's nice that you stopped by. Let me tell you about our priorities. So, you know, that was lame. This guy can pull this off. Prime Minister knows his way around a camera. It's better edited, better done. So I would expect that they're going to continue to produce high-quality stuff.
Here's the deal. Canada just
And Shakir, they even got Honda on board there for his walk through the factory.
Yeah, I mean, I would say on the capital gains piece, I think for them, one of the things that I think they've learned is that the carbon tax debate really got away from them. It became a policy that they couldn't explain, and I think they're trying to be proactive on the capital gains piece. To Catherine's point, this is actually a pretty complicated issue, and there's going to be a lot of, distorting the truth, distorting what happens here. So I think they want to communicate this very effectively to whoever's on those social media channels listening to what the Prime Minister has to say. That being said, I think it might not be as effective, whether or not you like the policy. I just think there's a lot of folks out there who just don't listen to the Prime Minister anymore. I do think that he's been tuned out quite a bit. So if you're not listening to the messenger, the message doesn't really matter. And I think they have that problem with the Prime Minister right now, that folks are not really taking in what he's saying. So we'll see how much traction it gets for him. And I mean, for it to be effective, what are we talking about here? Does the legislation pass? Are we talking about improved polling numbers? I'm not really sure what the metric here is for this to be actually effective right now, because I don't think passing this measure is going to change the Liberals' fortunes in the polls by any chance.
To Shakir's point, he used to be their best salesperson, Kathleen. And what Scott was saying, that they are maybe to some mixed success involving some of the ministers in it as well. Mm-hmm. If they're off the mat now, do you see them continuing putting Trudeau front and center, or do they try and mix in others there?
Well, it's an interesting question because frankly, we know that there's fatigue with Justin Trudeau. We know that Canadians are tired of him, and there's some exhaustion there. And so we did see a strategy around the budget rollout where they were trying to put more ministers out in front, like Minister Fraser and others. But as Scott says, he's very good at this. He's very persuasive, and he's good in front of the camera. So with a policy like capital gains, you're going to have to educate. It's too complicated. You're going to have to educate, and you're going to have to persuade. And they've done that. It's going to take a longer period of time. They've already pushed back on some of the industry associations, like the Chamber of Commerce, that kind of put out some misinformation at the beginning of when the announcement of the capital gains first came out, saying it would affect 1 in 5. That was just not true in terms of Canadians. It's actually a much, much smaller number. And so with him at the lead, with him at the helm, educating, getting the message out, they might punch through. But whether it actually gets off Twitter, as Marika says, and actually gets into low information voters' minds and regular people's is going to be a different question altogether.
Marika, is this the building block, like step one, and now they're going to start to build on this as they go forward? Because they have some runway.
Yeah, they have a year to a year and a half. I don't think it's step one. I think we've been seeing a much more focused and purposeful strategy for at least a month or two now. Whether it's working, the polls right now are not showing that it's having any impact there, but that might be more to the fact that interest rates are still high, and the Bank of Canada is saying they're not going down very quickly anytime soon. And maybe it's just that actually what they're doing right now can't change that baseline, the baseline context isn't changing.
Yeah.
The pressure on your pocketbooks isn't changing.
So, Scott, do you think that Justin Trudeau needs to do one with Tiff Macklem now?
Yeah, I think that would really be dazzling.
That's clickable, I think.
In a blue shirt, and then it'll contrast with his sharp vanilla white shirt for the Prime Minister. Look, a couple things about this just quickly in wrapping it up. One is, I think this is a better strategy when it comes to capital gains, trying to tempt the opposition back into the ring. I think this is a better executed video for what it is, where it exists, and where it resides in terms of media channels. But the fundamental questions, one Shakir raised earlier, will anybody listen to the Prime Minister? And then the second fundamental question is, why aren't they advertising? Because if you really wanted to punch through, get people's attention, and change votes, you'd be advertising. They need to do that. This is not going to cut it. There's a better version of what they've done in the past, but I'm not convinced that that's going to get the job done.
Shakir, I got about a minute left. Scott has brought this up in the past. You've got NHL playoffs going on right now. 2 Canadian teams, Edmonton against Vancouver. Why aren't they advertising in that space?
I don't have an answer to that. It blows my mind that they're not advertising. Maybe it's a money thing. Maybe it's a fundraising thing. It just doesn't make sense to me. And I mean, even now, obviously, they're way behind the 8 ball on this. They should have been advertising when Pierre first won the leadership. He's been able to define who he is, communicate to Canadians. So I think they're just late to the game. I don't have an answer for why they haven't done this. It actually blows my mind that they haven't been putting out more ads in primetime spots, like you say, in the NHL playoffs.
They got an empty net goal right in front of them. They're dumping it in the corner instead. That's my hockey analogy for Scott, I guess. I think that's the only.
Not for me, no.
I don't think it landed with anybody else out there. Scott Reed, Shakir Chambers, Kathleen Monk, and Marika Walsh. This may be the last time they agree to be on a panel with me after that. But that was your Power Play Day in politics, everyone. Thanks so much for sharing your